Domalde's death. Domalde took inheritance after his father Visbur and ruled the countries. During his days there was severe hunger and suffering in Svisjord. The Sviar then held a great blot at Uppsala. During the first autumn they sacrificed oxen, but it didn't improve the year at all. The second autumn they sacrificed men, but the year turned out even worse. But come the third year, and large numbers of Sviar came to Uppsala for the sacrifices. Then the chieftains held council and agreed that the reason for the famine was to be found in their king Domalde, and they should sacrifice him for the year, take him on and kill him, and paint the stalls red with his blood. And that is what they did. So says Sjodolfr. It happened, they reddened the lands, the sword bearers with their king. And the army from the lifeless Domalde, their drenched weapons they drew. Thus the harvest eager took the Jotun foe, Svea kin, and sacrificed him. Domarr's death. Domalde's son was called Domarr, and he was the next to rule the kingdom, and he ruled the lands for a long time, and there were good years and peace during his days. Of him is said nothing more than he died the illness death at Uppsala, and had his funeral voyage at Fyrisvollane, and was burned at Åbrinken. And there is his menhir. So says Sjodolfr. And I often, about the Yngva of wise men have asked, where Domarr on the resounding bane of Halfr was carried. I know now the pain-struck descendant of Fjölnir burned at Fyri. Dyggve's death. His son was called Dyggve, and he next ruled the lands, and of him nothing else is said than he died the illness death. So says Sjodolfr. I speak it plainly, that Dyggve's corpse, the gnaw of Glitnir, gives much pleasure, since the sister of the wolf and Narfi the king would choose, and the mighty Yngva king by Loke's maiden has been played. Dyggve's mother was Drott, daughter of King Damp, the son of Rig, who was the first to be called king in the Danish tongue. His kinsfolk have ever since used the royal title as their main honorific title. Dyggve was the first to be called king among his kin, as before this they were called Drottnar, and their wives Drottning, and their hird Drott, and every one of their kin were called Yngve or Inguni, and as a whole Ynglingar. Drott the Drottning was the sister of King Dan the Mighty, whom gave his name to Denmark. And Dagr the Wise. King Dyggve's son was called Dagr, and he took the kingdom after King Dyggve. He was a man of such wisdom that he understood the tongue of the birds. He had a sparrow that gave him many tidings and flew to many countries. There was one time when the sparrow flew to Reidgotaland, to a farm called Verva. He flew into the farmer's field and had some food there. The farmer came over and picked up a rock and crushed the sparrow to death. King Dagr became worried when the sparrow didn't return. He then made a sacrifice for news of the sparrow and was given an answer, that his sparrow had been killed at Verva. He gathered a great army and traveled to Gotland. And when he came to Verva, he went in with his army and wreaked havoc. People fled away wide and far. When evening came, King Dag turned his army back to the ships, and he had killed many people and arrested many. But when they went over a river at a place called Skjotansvad, or Våpnavad, a work thrall scrambled out of the forest by the riverside and threw a hay fork amongst them, and it struck the king in the head. He instantly fell off his horse and died. In those times, they called the chieftain at war for Grammer, and his soldiers for Gramir. So says Sjodolfr. I learned of Dagr tidings of death. Eager for fame, he set out to travel. With the branch of slain, he came to Verva, the wise warrior for Spur's revenge. And the word from eastern lands, the king's army, from battle bore, that the Grammer got his lot, from fling grasper of Sleipnir's meal.
Yeah, so
Some notes again on terms and translation. And the first one is just a repetition of I translate sacrificial rites, or I don't translate blot. I use the original word blot, which I've mentioned before is the word for sacrificial rites. And in the poem Yngva, this is pointing to the cairn of a prince, because he's of the Ynglinga kin. So Yngva here is similar to a princely title. Descendant of Fjölnir, this is also a kenning for the Ynglinga kin, so he's of the royal lineage. Fjölnir is the son of Frey, and he is therefore of Ynglinga royal lineage. And burned at Fyri, this is at Fyrisån, Fyris, or also many times in the sagas called Fyrisvollene, close to Uppsala in Sweden. Gnaw of Glitnir, this is a kenning for the means a horse goddess, and it's a kenning for Hel. And the next kenning is also a kenning for Hel, and this is the sister of a wolf and Narfi. And then the personal guard of a king or a drott is called a hird. And I don't translate this because it's a very specific and often used, and the connotations are different than, to my mind anyway, the normal palace guard, royal guard. Hird doesn't have to be royal. Like a jarl could have a hird, or a hashe could have a hird. So it's a lord and their guard. The guard is the hird. Drottning is queen. So drott is king and drottning queen. These are the old terms for the royal lords. And then there's a term using that he learned the language of the he learned the song of the birds, and this is a little that he could understand the sparrow. And this is a little special because I've read some scholars who said this is actually a kenning for that he knew the language of the Polish areas. They were called the language of the sparrow. I'm not I don't know, if it's this or not, but it would make sense, since they are often the Viking. One of the main travel routes was, of course, down through Poland, and this whole area was called Gardariki, and there was a lot of contacts to Scandinavia and Poland and up the Baltic states. And then there's the term Reivgotaland, which is used with different meanings in different sagas. Reivgotaland literally means the land of the riding Goths. And some scholars say that if you go for the ancient sagas, it's most often points to the areas down towards the Black Sea and along the River Don. And but quite often it refers to, most people say it refers to Jutland, the main peninsula, the peninsula of Denmark. And if indeed it refers to Jutland in this case, it geographically makes some sense, and it also makes some sense with where he is murdered, which is at Verva. I haven't found any
scholars who say where they gave me an answer to where Verva is. But if Redgodaland in this connection is Jutland, then there is a place actually not so far from where I live, but it's down in the saga. Here in the saga, he is killed at a bridge crossing at Vervad, and there is a bridge crossing called Vervadsbro here in Denmark, here in Jutland, and quite close there's also Forledegård or Vørledegård. Danish pronounces Forledegård, but the spelling is like the spelling of the sagas of Verva, and these two places are in the same area, and this is also an area which has quite a lot of finds in them from Bronze Age and Iron Age. So then another thing is that the Vervadsbro crosses Gudnon, which is one of two main routes. If you came from, say, Gotland or from southern Norway and you wanted to attack Redgotaland or Jutland, at that time there weren't many harbors on the west coast. You would have to go in Limfjorden, either on the west or the east coast, or you could come via Gudnon, coming from the east coast, which in this case fits the saga geographically. If he went to Redgotaland and he's coming from Sweden, he'd come to the east coast, and then via Gudnon he could very quickly access the rich farmlands of middle Jutland. And going down Gudnon, he would have to pass this place, depending on how far in he went. But his army would have to sail past this place where Vervadsbro is. So I don't know if it's that place, but it's interesting. It's the only place I can find in the areas the sagas are talking about, that where you have a name etymology that fits it, and the etymology goes way back. Also the geographical descriptions fit more or less, and yeah, I've read some say that Redgotaland in this case is down south in Europe, and that the hayfork throne is a metaphor for a certain tribe attacking. But I don't know, it seems a little too convoluted, but this could also be the case. So that was dying at Verva. And then there's the kenning, the branch of the slain. This is a sword, kenning for a sword. And then there's the Spur's revenge. It's just Spur's revenge. Spurv in modern Scandinavian. It's just a sparrow. I could have translated it just with sparrow, actually. The fling grasper of Sleipnir's meals. This is a kenning, quite convoluted kenning for a hayfork. So the fling grasper of Sleipnir's meals. So he was killed by a hayfork. Yeah. Well, I think those are the comments on translations for this time, and see you next time.